Based on intelligence information and an operational necessity, IDF forces are carrying out a precise and targeted operation.
For example, in 2023, the IDF itself, one of the top commanders in the IDF, the head of the H200 AI data center, gave a lecture in Tel Aviv University where he presented a machine.
There is no army in the world that does more than the Israeli army, and the Israeli security services, and Israeli intelligence to prevent collateral damage.
Massive expose on AI, the involvement of AI in this genocide. And I have brought you other AI aspects that Israel's using to target people. One's called Gospel, but this is a new one. Horrific. Lavender is horrifying. And that's the name of this AI machine. So at least they named it accurately. Lavender is the AI machine directing Israel's bombing spree in Gaza. In 2021, this is so dystopian. The guy wrote a book in 2021 about creating this thing, and then he created it in Israel. A book titled The Human Machine Team, How to Create Synergy Between Human and Artificial Intelligence That Will Revolutionize Our World, was released in English under the pen name Brigadier General Y.S. Now, they've found out that the man who authored it can be confirmed to be the current commander of the elite Israeli intelligence unit 8200. So they've now outed this author who tried to keep his identity secret. And he makes the case for designing a special machine that could rapidly process massive amounts of data to generate thousands of potential quote-unquote targets for military strikes in the heat of war. Such technology, he writes, would resolve what he described as a human bottleneck for both locating the new targets and decision-making to approve the targets. So he's claiming that humans take too long to decide if we should murder someone. So what we'll do is we'll just create a computer program that takes a bunch of data points and says, murder this person, and then we'll go murder them, and we'll never ask questions. We'll never ask why. We'll never ask whether it was accurate. We'll never ask any of those things. We'll just go murder the people the computer told us to, because it said go boom, boom, and so we just did it. I mean, it is so dystopian and horrific. Such a machine, it turns out, actually exists. The Israeli army, this is coming from, I don't know, maybe someone knows. Is it called Plus 972 magazine? Or is it just called 972 magazine? I don't know what to do with the plus, all right? And plus to what? What are we adding this to? Anyway, that's where it's coming from if you want to read the full article. The Israeli army has developed an artificial intelligence-based program known as Lavender, unveiled here for the first time. Lavender's played a central role in the unprecedented bombing of Palestinians, especially during the early stages of this war, genocide. In fact, according to the sources, and I actually get why an article like this can't call it a genocide, because they want this article to be repeated and used by mainstream media. And if they were to use the word genocide, all mainstream media would immediately just toss it out. So I get that. But in fact, according to sources, its influence on the military's operation was such that they essentially treated the outputs of the AI machine as if it were a human decision, as if it were a command coming down from a higher up. Formally, the Lavender system is designed to mark all suspected operatives in the military wings of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, including low-ranking ones, as potential bombing targets. The sources told us that during the first weeks of the war, the army almost completely relied on Lavender, which clocked as many as, are you ready for this? 37,000 Palestinians as suspected militants and their homes for possible strikes. And we'll get more into the homes in a moment, but you got to understand that's 37,000. But as I'll discuss more in a second as well, they kill everyone around them. So when they go for one of those 37,000, they'll kill the whole family. So that 37,000 is multiplied by God knows how many when you actually, if they were to take them all out and take out all their families, you're talking 1 million people. You're talking just unfathomable numbers. Not that 37,000 isn't already unfathomable, but and by the way, this shows how behind our law is. Our law needs to catch up with AI. This should be a war crime. Like, there needs to be a new Geneva Convention where they go using AI and just pushing buttons with everything it tells you to kill. War crime. Just there it is. I mean, but we don't have any laws on the books, Geneva Convention wise, international law wise, when it comes to what we're allowed to have AI do. And you know, I may talk more about this, but this is the main reason that Israel uses it. One of the main reasons is they want to be able to say, well, it wasn't us, it was Lavender. Lavender told us to push the dingy button, so we did it. The big red button, Lavender told me to. And they can just put it off, and then no one's at fault, right? Who's at fault? The guy who programmed Lavender? You're gonna charge him for all 50,000 innocent civilians? It basically just wipes their hands of any guilt, which is laughable, of course. But during the early stage of the war, the Army gave sweeping approval for officers to adopt Lavender's kill list with no requirement to thoroughly check why the machine made those choices. They don't even ask why you've got a speaking spell telling you to murder people, murder that man. And then you just go, yep, sounds good to me. Don't even ask why. A 3-year-old asks why for most things. Thoroughly check why the machine made those choices or to examine the raw intelligence data on which they are based. That's the other thing is your average person clicking these buttons and blowing up people probably doesn't even have access to the data that made that decision. It's just a black box, like our voting machines. One source stated that human personnel often served only as a rubber stamp for the machine's decisions, adding that normally they would personally devote about 20 seconds to each target before authorizing a bombing, just to make sure the Lavender marked target is male. That was it. Is the person male? Then blow them up. This was despite knowing that the system makes what are regarded as errors in approximately 10% of cases. So 10% of the time, it is completely wrong. Like, it's not even bombing the person that it thought it was bombing or whatever. But that 10% does not count all of the countless innocent civilians that are killed in each of these strikes. So the 10% is just completely a false targeting. But it's the number of innocents is way, way, way more than that 10%. The Israeli army systematically attacked the targeted individuals while they were in their homes, usually at night while their whole families were present, rather than during the course of military activity. Additional automated systems, including one called Where's Daddy, also revealed here for the first time, were used specifically to track the targeted individuals and carry out bombings when they had entered their families' residences. So they're intentionally targeting the family home. As we get deeper into this, you'll see Israel claims that's because that's the easiest time to target them. You see them walk into their house, that's when to get them. But I'm sure it's also because Israel, acting in this genocidal way, wants to take out their whole family, because then you don't have any kids, you don't have any parents who want to get revenge. You've taken out their entire social circle in one bombing. But of course, this means that it is a crazy, it's a 1 to 10 or something innocents versus actual target being killed. The result, as the sources testified, is that thousands of Palestinians, most of them women and children or people who were not involved in the fighting, were wiped out by Israeli airstrikes, especially during the first weeks of the war because of the AI program's decisions. This AI system that's being used to kill tens of thousands in Gaza. And this is coming from internally anonymous sources in the IDF and intelligence officers. And it really is crazy. But an intelligence officer told the magazine the IDF bombed these so-called militants, these so-called targets in their homes without hesitation as a first option. It's much easier to bomb a family's home. The system is built to look for them in these situations. So they're saying it's much easier to bomb a home. I also think they probably want to take out the entire family of the person they're targeting. But as I've mentioned, these people are innocent. They've done nothing. Many of them are just fully innocent. Many of them are family members of, a militant, but a militant in an occupied territory. A fundamental difference between the two systems. So they mentioned gospel, which was one I brought you, an AI system I brought you before that Israel used. A fundamental difference between these two systems is in the definition of the target, whereas the gospel targets buildings and structures that the army claims militants operate from. Lavender marks people. Lavender creates a kill list. When it came to targeting alleged junior militants marked by Lavender, the army preferred to only use unguided missiles or dumb bombs, which can destroy entire buildings on top of their occupants and cause significant casualties because, quote, you don't want to waste expensive bombs on unimportant people, unquote. Continue the quote, it's very expensive for the country and there's a shortage of those bombs, unquote. How insane is that quote? How unhinged is that quote? So they use the dumb bombs that destroy the entire building because they don't want to waste their smart bombs. But of course, that's admitting that these are unimportant people. So why are you targeting unimportant people? Like you're not supposed to admit they're unimportant if you're assassinating people and taking out their whole family. But that's exactly what they're doing. Another source said they had personally authorized the bombing of hundreds of private homes of alleged junior operatives marked by Lavender, with many of these attacks killing civilians and entire families. In an unprecedented move, the army also decided during the first weeks of the war that for every junior Hamas operative that Lavender marked, it was permissible to kill up to 15 to 20 civilians to take out an unimportant target. It's just every level of this is just unbelievable. Several occasions authorized the killing of more than 100 civilians in the assassination of a single commander. So 100 civilians, they got one commander. Horrific. But on top of this, 20 people to take out one innocent person. Apparently before this war, before this genocide, before October 7th, it was actually rare for Israel to get the approval or to approve of killing a whole group of people to take out one person. It had to be a higher level person. They had to get approval from multiple people. But then after October 7th, Israel just took all the gloves off and basically says, if this AI program says kill them, just kill their whole family. Once the list was expanded to include tens of thousands of lower ranking operatives, the Israeli army figured it had to rely on automated software and artificial intelligence. The result, AI did most of the work. Lavender's marked 37,000 people for extermination. Sources said that if Lavender decided an individual was a militant Hamas, they were essentially asked to treat that as an order with no requirement to independently check the machine. Here's another quote from one source inside the military. It was very surprising for me that we were asked to bomb a house to kill a ground soldier whose importance on the fighting was so low. I nicknamed these targets garbage targets. Still, I found them more ethical. They're not ethical at all, so I don't know if you can call it more ethical if it's got zero ethical nature to it. But he said, I found them more ethical than the targets that we bombed just for quote unquote deterrence. High rises that are evacuated and toppled just to cause destruction. So destroying entire high rises, entire apartment buildings. There's a photo of one of them. Well, that's an entire block, but entire high rises, entire apartment buildings, just to make life hell, just to be a quote unquote deterrent, just to ethnically cleanse the area. This is how it works. It gives almost every single person in Gaza a rating from 1 to 100 of how closely they could be connected to a militant or be a militant. An individual found to have several different incriminating features will reach a high rating and thus automatically becomes a potential target for assassination. But we don't know all of the ways that they decide these things. And of course, many of them can be decided, you can get a higher ranking by accident. Let's see, is this? So they say such as things as being in a WhatsApp group with a known militant. Well, a WhatsApp group could have dozens of people. You could be a family member. You could be, the mailman of a like. It's just stupid. They say changing cell phone every few months and changing addresses frequently. Well, changing a cell phone every few months. A lot of people in Gaza do that because they have very cheap phones. I mean, I don't know if that's cheap for them. I just mean they don't have like, there's not a lot of probably high level smartphones and stuff. So phones are changed a lot in Gaza. And the idea that that puts you on a list to be assassinated is so unfathomable. It's so insane. It's so unhinged. And they're trying to normalize this. I mentioned this earlier. They want this to become what we're okay with. Oh, yeah, guy. Well, look, he shouldn't have bought a new cell phone if he didn't want to get bombed and his whole family killed. What? Like, do you hear yourselves? It's so ridiculous. Emphasizing that eventually people of flesh and blood take. So they're talking about when this lunatic who came up with this program would give, they got slides of his presentations. He'd give presentations on how it should work and things like that. And they'd often emphasize when talking about this that, quote, eventually people of flesh and blood make the decisions. In the defense realm, ethically speaking, we put a lot of emphasis on this. These tools are meant to help intelligence officers break their barriers. So to get this approved, to make this something that people were accepting of, both in Israel, but in other areas of the world, they ran around, not just him, but many have run around giving the talks about how we need AI to decide who to target. But don't worry, it'll be a human that makes the final decision. Have no fear. We'll have a sociopath sitting at the desk who's ready to push the button. It'll be a human. So they say, oh, that's so much. That's so ethical because it's a human that makes the decision at the end. And then they don't even do that. As we've been reading, as sources have said, it ultimately was 37,000 people on the list, and the humans were only deciding whether it was a man or not. Is it male? Boop. Kill their whole family. I mean, so they run around saying it has to be a human decision, and then they basically, everyone drops the human decision out of it. Lavender's calculations were considered accurate only 90% of the time, meaning 10% of the human targets slated for assassination had absolutely nothing to do with Hamas's military wing. The Lavender machine sometimes mistakenly flagged individuals who had communications patterns similar to Hamas, including police and civil defense workers, militants' relatives, residents who happen to have a name or a nickname similar to an operative, Gazans who used a device that once belonged to a Hamas operative. That's the other thing that happens in territories where you don't have just tons of technology coming in every day. People share them. They donate them. They give them away. Oh, I got a new phone. Here, do you want a phone? And people go, yeah, I want a phone. And now they don't realize they've got the phone of a Hamas militant and they're going to be executed and their whole family's going to be killed. It's a vague boundary. One of the sources says, is a person who doesn't receive a salary from Hamas but helps them with all sorts of things a Hamas operative? Is someone who was in Hamas in the past but no longer is a Hamas operative? Each of these features, characteristics that a machine would flag as suspicious, is inaccurate. Yeah, of course it is. Also, as with any, military or militant group that doesn't have tons of resources, I guarantee you that they, pay a kid to run a cell phone to someone or pay someone to, hey, here's $20, take this message to someone else. I'm sure there's thousands and thousands of people that Israel goes, oh, they're helping Hamas. They know what they're doing. Plus, you could be, let's move to the U.S. Let's talk about the U.S. for a second. If you were a militant and you got in an Uber, well, if this AI program would say the Uber driver was facilitating militants, facilitating Hamas or something. So even in the United States, we have plenty of connections with people that would make it look like we're on this list to be targeted.